So today I want to do some work on this panel, specifically around these upgrade buttons, which at the moment it's one for each upgrade type. And then when you click on the button, it populates this box with the description about what it does. So at the moment, everything's in a grid layout group, and I've just defined the buttons manually, and then we're hooking everything up in code. So what I want to do is change it so that we only have one button template, and then at runtime, we use that to generate all the buttons based on the upgrade, which will make things a lot more flexible. So every time I add a new upgrade type, the button will automatically get created. We are going to run into some issues because we're going to have to redesign the panel because there's too many upgrades and I'm running out of space. So that'll be a problem for another day. But the first step to make that easier is to make these buttons generated at runtime. So let's go ahead and do that. So at the moment we have this array for all the upgrade buttons, but then we also have every button defined individually, which we shouldn't need to do. We should be able to make that much more generic. And then in our game manager, we loop through all those upgrade buttons and then we assign a callback to it. So we've already got the start of the functionality we're going to need here. We have this one function that gets used for every single upgrade button. And then all it does is set some values that when we go and buy the upgrade, it looks at what upgrade we had selected and decides to upgrade things from there. So we've got the start of the foundation. Really all we're going to need to do is, instead of having a button for every single upgrade that we then put inside an array directly in the editor, we'll just instantiate each button and populate the array at runtime. In order to do that, we're going to need a button to use as a template. So let's go ahead and create that. Given that we're going to be creating these and the text will just come from the upgrade name, and if there's any issues with the name, we can always make a map later to associate an upgrade type with a specific label we want, with some sort of config file if we need to. So we'll keep it simple for now and just use the upgrade name. So we should be fine to actually just go ahead and delete all of these buttons. Okay, let's make this one our button template. We'll just put some placeholder text. And then the menu is just going to need a variable for that template. So all we need is just one variable for the template and then another variable for the array. I'll leave all these variables here for now, otherwise I'll run into a bunch of compiler errors, but we will eventually remove these. So where we're looping over the buttons and hooking up the button callback, we're gonna have to modify this a little bit so that we are creating the buttons first. So this is basically all we need to do. We can get the number of buttons we're gonna need based on the number of entries in the enum, and we just have one button per value in the enum. Then we go ahead and actually instantiate the button, set the button text, so that label that we had before to match the upgrade name, and then we can connect the on-click callback like we are currently. So let's see what we need to do here. This isn't going to work anymore because our array doesn't have a length because it hasn't even been instantiated, and we don't have anything stored in there. So we're going to have to create that first. So it's going to be a new button array, and then what we can put in there is we can get the number of entries we have in an array. We can get the number of entries we have in an enum by using this. So the enum class get values, pass in the type we've got. That'll give us an array containing all of the actual values. And we just want the length of that, and then that'll tell us how many entries this enum has. So then we can take that upgrade count and we can initialize the array with that value. So now we will have an array that has a slot for every single upgrade ID. And then in here, we're now fine to loop over this because we've just initialized it to be the correct size. But this upgrade button's I is going to be null because the array is empty. So before we can do anything, we're going to have to actually instantiate it, which we can do because we now have a variable for the template. But I have missed a step here. So in order for us to instantiate the buttons, we're going to have to know what its parent should be. So that'll be the game object that has the grid layout component. So we're just going to have to check what that is and add a reference to that to our menu, so that when we instantiate the buttons, we can give them a proper parent in the hierarchy. So in this case, it's going to be this left panel game object, corresponding to the left section here. So in our menu, I usually use the word container to reference anything that is going to hold a bunch of stuff. And I never know whether to store the object as a transform or as a game object. It usually depends what I'm actually using it for. So in this case, given that I want it to be used when I call instantiate to give an object a particular parent, it wants the transform for that. So I'll probably store it as a transform. Cool, so now we have the actual buttons, the template we're using, and the container where all those buttons need to be stored. So going back to where we're setting everything up, we can now go ahead and set that parent to be the upgrade buttons container. So now that we've got the button, we can set its name. And all we want to do is grab the index we're working on and just cast that to the enum. And then that'll give us the name of the particular enum value. It makes for a little bit of an ugly syntax. So basically what we need to do is take I, our index, convert that to the actual enum value. But name is a string and the enum is obviously going to be an upgrade ID, and it doesn't automatically convert it to a string for us. So we then need to wrap this around so we can take the result of casting our integer to the enum, and then we can turn that result into a string. Cool. And since we've already got a local variable for it, we'll make this a little bit nicer and just use the local variable name rather than indexing it. And that should be it. So fetch a number of entries in the upgrade enum, which gave us our upgrade count, which we used to initialize the array. We instantiated a button for each upgrade type. We set its name, which is not actually what we want. We don't want to set the name of the game object. We actually want to set the text on it. Yeah, so unfortunately a button obviously does not have a label itself. So this is going to be an instance where, again, it's a good idea to create a little class here, because now we have a button, but we also need to be able to change its label easily. So I could use get component here, given that I know each button only has a single child, and that child has a text component. So I could fetch it that way, but it's not very future-proof. If the layout ever changes, I'm going to run into issues there. The fact that it's slow to fetch is actually not a huge concern because I'm doing it on startup, but it's more about the flexibility and future-proofing. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new class for this. So you might have seen earlier we created a UI boulder icon class, and the point of that was to just give us two images, one for the icon and one for the border, and it was a lot easier to work with when we made a class out of that rather than having to worry about fetching components. So we're going to do the same thing here, same pattern here, and we'll just make a class called UI upgrade button. And in the same way, this is just going to provide a simple wrapper for the actual button and the text element, which we might just call label. So then in our menu, we're no longer working with buttons directly, but we will be working with UI upgrade buttons. So our template needs to be a UI upgrade button, and so does our array. So if we go back to our instantiation code, we're going to have to change a few things here. So rather than creating a button array, it'll be a UI upgrade button array. And same thing here. Cool. And this onClick no longer belongs to the object itself, but belongs to its button variable. And rather than changing the game object name, we can go ahead and change the text on the label. All right, so that's all of those 4 steps done, which means if we go and hook up the references in the editor, we can go and test and see how we went. So all of these are missing because I deleted them. It'd be interesting to see what happens. Off the top of my head, I think we'll run into a bunch of exceptions, but it's possible we might get away with it. Either way, for now, we will need to set the template. So the upgrade button template goes nowhere because we haven't added a script to it yet. So we can add that there. And then if you're ever trying to add a reference in the editor that is already on the object, and you've got a lot of components and it can be a little bit awkward to scroll up and drag them down, you can actually just drag the object from the hierarchy directly in, and it'll be able to figure out if it has the right component on there and put it straight in. So I can do that for the button, but the label is a child. So I'll go ahead and drag that in as well. So now that the template has the UI upgrade button on it, we can drag the template in here, and we can also drag the transform of our container in. We don't actually want this array to be in the inspector. So I'll just go ahead and change that so it doesn't serialize. You can use hide and inspector, but I don't like it. I think it's ugly. I don't really like how the left-hand side doesn't line up. I think it makes the code a lot harder to read. Okay, so we've got the upgrade button template. We've got the container. We're instantiating the buttons and our array at runtime. So let's go ahead and see what happens. Yeah, so in order to test this, I need a round to finish, which is going to take 90 seconds. So there's two ways I can fix this. One is to just change the settings in the game manager. So I can just go ahead and change this round duration. But I also went and set up a debug menu, which I can't remember how to open. I can't remember what I ended up using to open that. It's possible I never finished it. Okay, so I've got it bound to the back quote, which I believe should just be tilde without shift held down, but that wasn't bringing it up before. I didn't have window focus, okay. Yeah, so as I was saying, I need to wait for the round to end, which takes 90 seconds, but that's not very good for testing. So I can just go ahead and change the settings in here, the round duration to be shorter. But I made a debug menu to fix things like this, make it easy to test. So I can just bring that up and end the round, and then that'll bring my menu up for me. So this is great because it's sort of showing the exact issue that I thought we would run into before, where we don't really have enough space for everything. A lot of the text is overflowing, and it's signaling that we're going to need a bigger refactor of this panel. We'll save that for another day. Today I just want to get the instantiation working, and it looks like we're mostly there. The only issue being that our template that we had at the start, this ABC is still there. So it's an extra one that's not being counted. But if I go ahead and turn that off, the layout fixes itself, which works nicely. Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're just going to turn off the template because it's already in the hierarchy. And if I want to use that as one of our upgrade buttons, then it's going to be a little bit awkward because this loop here is instantiating everything we need, but then also changing properties of the thing we instantiate. But if I then go ahead and use one of the buttons, if I then go ahead and use the template as one of our indexes, I'm going to have to split this up into two loops, and it's going to be a little bit awkward. So I think what I'm going to do is, given that the layout will work as long as the template is disabled, I think we're just going to go ahead and do that. And then we can keep one nice clean loop for instantiating and setting everything up. All right, and I think that should be it. Fantastic. All right, we'll just double check that the upgrades actually work. So if I spend a bunch of gold to upgrade my income, fantastic. And the other one I usually do for testing, something that's obvious to see, is the boulder radius. So upgrade that a lot, start the round, close the debug menu. There we go. All right, very cool. So we now have this menu instantiating the buttons at runtime, and it made it very, very clear that there's not enough space here and we're gonna have to change the layout of this panel. So we will have a look at that next time.